This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome back to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm here with Carlos Arcila from Cofinet. Welcome back, Carlos.
Hi, Lee. Great to be back here again with you.
We had a very interesting conversation yesterday in the last episode when we were talking about the uniqueness, let's say, of and the interesting ways that the Colombian coffee supply chain is unique. Today, we want to deep dive into some of the challenges that you mentioned in the last episode. So why don't you tell us again what some of those challenges are, and then let's explore them a little bit.
Yeah, look, the working in coffee in the last 2 years have been completely exciting and interesting. I always call it with my team like a roller coaster. 1 week you're in a perfect situation. The next week we think we're going to be out of business. The next week it's fantastic. It's been really challenging. But to dive into Colombia, I think some of the challenges have been basically the last year and a half. Prices have been a very difficult thing to manage because the expectation of growers, the expectation of roasters around the world. For many years, prices were very stable in a way, but when you have a price increase that goes from a C price from being at $1 to $2.50, there's a lot of changes internally. And that obviously brings a lot of conflicts into the supply chain because no one wants to see the price rising every month after month after month. So that it brings a lot of difficult, obviously, conversations. But I guess that always puts into practical how sustainable and solid your relationship is with the people that you work with. Also, the last few things as well is that we've had a lot of rain and it's been extremely challenging to pick and to process coffees in these conditions. Colombia has a lot of, it's really high moisture. So when you're drying coffees, moisture is a critical thing because even if it's hot and the moisture is really, really high, that means you're not drying, but you're probably fermenting, going backwards. So that brings a lot of complexities and challenges into drying coffees. And that particularly is really, really difficult, especially for farms that are at 1,800, 2,000 meters because the weather is going to be colder. But when you have rain every single day, it's really challenging to dry coffee. So most of those farmers, what they do or what we tell them to do is to pick their own coffees and try to dry coffees at a lower altitude where they're going to have a bit more higher temperature and perhaps sometimes even better weather. But it is very challenging because that means you need to add a lot of things into your equation. Transport, you need to make sure that every day you're transporting cherries because you cannot just let them ferment for a couple of days and then drive them down. It also brings the challenge of how much do you produce. If you produce very little coffee, then it's really challenging to just pay for the transport because it's going to increase a lot your cost. So all these things, they all have a massive impact on your final pricing and how competitive you can be. And yeah, that's very challenging. And then the other one that is that Colombia has been very unstable the last year and a half in terms of the political status. So we went last year through a very difficult period where we had the strikes, and that was really hard to deal with. Again, some of the states sometimes have different complications where you can have strikes done by the transport companies or different things. So all of these challenges have put extra pressure into the operations that we have, not only us, but other farmers and other exporters in Colombia. And that's obviously made it a lot more challenging. And when you're running an operation where you work with a lot of people around the world, your first thing is you got to be able to get coffees to the point that you promised and at the time that you promised. So for us, it's very critical to always consider all these problems, analyze the situation. And what we've gone to is that we need to work far ahead to be able to meet all the deadlines and timelines. And that means we need to almost have plan A, B, and C because everything is being very unstable in the last year and a half in Colombia, and not only in Colombia, but around the world. So I guess the only way to overcome these challenges is by being flexible, being able to change your plans on the go, and being creative. I think that's another thing that everyone needs to be. You got to be able to change the whole way you work in one day to another because the the environment and the place that we live in is changing every day.
It's such great advice for particularly the challenging times that are ahead of us, with a potential recession ahead of us and lots of inflation happening. And I really want to deep dive into that subject with you in an upcoming episode in this series, because I just think that the way that you approach business is something that a lot of people could learn from. And so I really want to hear your thoughts on that subject so that we can pass some wisdom on to people who aren't quite sure how to get prepared for that. But something that I want to explore, you mentioned three issues in particular that have been challenging over the past couple of years: the increase in, or the volatility in the C market.
Yes, in prices.
The weather conditions and the geopolitical issues that are going on over there. Now, if we look at how all of those challenges come together, who is the greatest impacted there? Is it the producer that's the greatest impacted, or is it the consuming end that's the greatest impacted? Do you think?
Look, I guess this impacts everyone. The producers, for a change, are getting really good money for the coffees. We're getting really good premiums. But the one thing that I think that goes into, and this will probably answer your question, is that we all think the prices are super high, but the real thing behind it is that, as we were talking about, there's inflation, there is difficulties. So the cost of production that not a lot of people are talking these days has gone through the roof as well. And that
Explain that a little. I really want people to understand what you mean by that with regards to like input costs and things like that.
Absolutely. So labor in Colombia has been difficult to get at the moment. Even at our farms, we're employing a lot of people from Venezuela because it's the only labor that we're being able to get, which is a great thing because we can support them as well. But that means the labor costs are going higher. All the different fertilizers that we use in our farms have gone through the roof. We're paying almost 2 or 3 times for the fertilizers, and the other challenge is we cannot even get enough. So normally when we would order 100 bags, the suppliers would say there's only 20 or 30 bags available of that for you. So that's going to be a massive problem as well. But in a nutshell, the cost of producing coffee has gone probably 40 or 50% higher than before, which means if you look at it in perspective, the fact that we're probably getting paid double of what we used to pay 2 years ago, it doesn't mean that we're making double the money. It means that we are definitely making a better margin on the coffees by producing coffees, but it's also shortening every time because the cost of production is going higher. So the labor, the fertilizers, everything we do to process and to make sure that we have a good product is gone higher, which means the cost of producing that coffee is going to go really higher. And I believe we're only at the beginning of it. So the question is, where is that going to lead to, and how far is it going to go to as well? Because lately we've seen the prices spike a lot, but now slowly they're coming down again. So it's obviously a concern as your prices, the selling prices are coming down, but the cost of producing is going up. So we're hoping that it doesn't happen again like it happened in the past, where your cost of selling or the selling price that you get is lower than your cost of production. And that is where a lot of farmers will suffer. In the meantime, obviously, as prices are a lot higher than the cost of production, obviously there is benefits for farmers, and there's also challenges for roasters around the world because the cost of goods have gone up a lot and very significantly as well.
What impact does things like the war in Russia, the geopolitical issues outside of Colombia? Jonas Figueiredo came on the podcast and was talking about how fertilizers that come from Ukraine, and not only fertilizers, but a lot of the minerals that are used in coffee production, in growing coffee, they come from Russia and Ukraine. What kinds of impacts is that going to have on coffee producers in Colombia being able to maintain the kinds of yields that they've had, so that when they are getting the good prices, they can at least maintain the same kinds of expectations that they want from a crop?
Well, it's a hard question to answer, but what we've seen so far is that obviously fertilizers are almost 3 times higher than what they used to be a year and a half ago. So that is a massive impact. And what that means also is that a lot of farmers will just decide to put or to use less fertilizer, which is going to have a direct impact on the quality of the coffees. The other big impact as well is that the production this year is really low. So when you have higher cost of productions and your yield of production is really low, that means also that's going to bring a lot of challenges to producers in Colombia. And then finally, obviously, is that Ukraine and Russia were big consumers of coffees. And at the moment, it's almost illegal to work with them. So those coffees got to find a place in the world. And that is causing major repercussions around the world in logistics, because there was contract signed with Russian entities, not only us, but other exporters as well. And then those coffees suddenly need to find another home. And that not only breaks up a lot of relationships and things that we worked really hard on to get to, but it also creates a mess in terms of logistics, because suddenly you had bookings made for Russia and for Ukraine, and then or things that were in the water already, and that needs to be diverted to another place. And that creates a lot of dramas in the international freights. So I think the repercussions of that is crazy. And that allows us, it's crazy how connected we are these days with all the countries. You almost think before like, okay, that's crazy, that's really sad, but is that going to have an impact on us? And the answer is yes. And it's more critical than what we think.
Yeah, challenging times. Just a quick question before we wrap up. When you say that the yield is low this year, is it because it's a down year or because of other impacts?
I think it's literally the weather. The weather has been really bad. We've had a lot of rain, not enough sun, so the flowering has been very low. And people are talking about 30%, 20% down from the previous year that was already down. So we still don't know exactly. The harvest is started 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's yet to get to the peak, but everyone is talking about really being hard to get enough coffee for the commitments, which in a nutshell usually pushes the prices up. But I guess the bigger mover of prices these days is still Brazil. So we're all waiting to see what's going to happen with Brazil and the harvest in Brazil.
I'm going to ask an ignorant question here, but excuse me because I don't buy green coffee. What happens if a producer can't fulfill their commitments on a contract?
In the real world, or look, it's an interesting question because there's many answers to that. And it all depends on how formal your agreement was with them,
right,
and how strong your relationship is. In the real world, you should be signing a contract. But the thing is that when you go and look into how coffee is sold in Colombia, remember at the beginning of last podcast, I told you that the average producer owns 3 to 4 acres in Colombia, and they live up in the mountains far away.
There's no money for lawyers.
Exactly. And there's not even many times a formal contract. You just invite them to a table, you sit down, you agree to a quality, you cup the coffees, and you agree to pay them a premium, and then you're hoping that they deliver the coffees. So it is very difficult and very challenging. And this is why it's been so difficult in the last 12 months or year and a half, because as prices increases, most of the farmers that sign contracts or sign future contracts, they're missing out on getting better premiums. And it's very challenging for them because for so many years, they've been just breaking even or losing money. And then suddenly the opportunity is there to do a lot better for them, for their families. And they sign contracts ahead where they're not going to get the premiums. So it's really challenging. It all goes back to relationships and how much we want to help them and how much we believe they should also help us in a way. So there's not a straight answer for that. I guess you take it case by case. And we've always believed that it is important to look at the next 5-10 years of where we want to be and believe and really decide, make a decision on what to do with this type of situations, depending on whether we see ourselves working with these people in the next 5-10 years or not. And that will probably give us a better answer of how to proceed when they don't show up with the coffee that they committed to.
Yeah, awesome. In the next episode, we're going to talk about some innovation that has happened in amongst Colombian coffee producers. And I wonder if you've got anything at all that you could share on that side of things. Folks, make sure you tune into the next episode because I have been waiting a couple of years to talk to Carlos about this exact subject. You know, it was a hot topic in the coffee media last year. So we'll explore that and we'll talk about it in the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks friends, if you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.